it was really one of those like, just take a leap of faith. You put the deposit down, and that's when shit gets real, right? Literally.
It's real, man. All right, welcome everybody. Today we have Josh Leong in the house.
Hi, Jason. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here. Let me introduce Josh a bit. Josh Leong is a bespoke shoemaker from Singapore that focuses on footwear that is using both traditional and modern shoemaking techniques. Right? He has 3 brands under him. Josh Leong himself with his bespoke shoes. He founded Heirloom in 2016. It's casual footwear.
Yep, we do sneakers.
Sneakers?
Yep.
Okay, interesting. And then Palola, which is ladies' footwear.
That's correct.
Okay, so I understand you moved to Florence, Italy to further hone your craft by learning from the master leather craftsman. You took the opportunity to learn shoemaking from an Italian master shoemaker named Angelo
Imperatrice. Yeah, it's a tough one.
That was difficult, right? Okay. And then you also did your apprenticeship over at Stefano Bama.
Bama, yeah. So they're a very famous bespoke shoemaker in Florence, in Italy.
Okay,
Yep.
okay. And then he decided, okay, after all that, he's going to try it out. So, Josh, in this day and age where everybody is almost like, okay, let's just get a job. Forget about passion. Passion has no place to talk about when it comes to the job. We just want to do work and then get paid and all that. It's interesting that Singaporean becomes master shoe craftsman. Would you call yourself what do you call them?
Well,
this profession?
the correct definition would be a shoemaker.
Shoemaker.
In a way. We are a craftsman of sorts, just that we specialize in shoes.
Right.
Specifically, whenever we say shoemaker, doesn't mean we only make shoes. Like you can make, flats, you can make heels, you can make slippers if we really wanted to. But it's just that the generic name is just shoemaker. But I think how I even got into the whole journey was it really started with a passion for the material. So I really liked leather.
Okay, when was this?
This was
primary school, secondary school. When was this that you found? Like, did you happen to see a shoe and it's like, hey, interesting?
Yeah.
Or what happened?
So I think there were two separate passions. One obviously was shoes. This is something that I started being passionate about even in primary school. So my mom used to call me a centipede. Because me alone, I would have more shoes than my entire family combined.
Okay.
And sneakers have always been my passion. So it's even as a kid, I would save up all my pocket money, and instead of buying comics or buying video games, I'd buy shoes. And then my mom kind of felt that why do you have so many pairs of shoes? You only have one pair of feet.
Yeah.
So that was one passion, and a separate passion that I had was with leather, as I mentioned earlier. It's one of the materials, I think, where the more you use it, the nicer it becomes. I think this is something that really intrigued me about the material, because most things these days, they're not designed to last, they're not built to last. In fact, I think they're built with the intention of breaking down after 6 months, a year, so that you buy more. Right?
Buy butter, buy and throw away.
I won't mention any names, but
I'll say it.
Yeah, so I think it really started with a love affair with material. So I always knew eventually I would want to do a business that involved leather.
Right.
And
so your passion for sneakers started really young.
As a kid. So even in primary school, I remember going to Queensway. I mean, for those of you that are around my age, Queensway was the place if you wanted to buy any kind of shoes.
Isn't it still now?
It is, but I think it's less popular these days. Nowadays, most people buy their kicks online. Kith and the clothing and all that kind of stuff. But essentially when I was growing up, Queensway was the place to go if you wanted the latest Nikes or Adidas or whatever. I think combining my two passions of shoes, footwear and leather, that was really how I ended up going to Italy. In 2014, I did kind of like a course at a vocational school, where they basically teach traditional crafts. So not just shoemaking, but there was bag making, stained glass painting, portrait painting.
So every traditional craft and just shoemaking was one of them.
Exactly.
Right.
So after I graduated from the school, I guess with the certificate of sorts, I literally took a pair of shoes that I made there, and I went, to Stefano Bema and said, would you take me in? And it just so happened that my master, Angelo, happened to be the master of Stefano when he was first starting out.
Oh.
So in a way, it kind of, it gave me the credibility. And then the shoemakers at Stefano Bema said, okay, sure, come on in. And then that's how I got my apprenticeship and all that kind of stuff. So that was really the beginning of the whole journey as a shoemaker. And then after spending more than a year in Florence, I actually ran out of money because they don't pay us much as apprentices. I knew that I needed to keep some money so that when I came back to Singapore, if I wanted to set up a business or start a business, that would be the seed capital in a way. And so I came back in end of 2015.
Right.
And that's where I set up Josh Leong, which is my bespoke line. When I first started, in fact, I only did bespoke shoes. There were no kind of off-the-rack options, and it was only for men. And I think along the way, I always knew that at some point I would return to my first love, which is sneakers.
Sneakers, yes.
And that's where Heirloom came about. So the following year, I knew that, okay, now that I've kind of got a feel for the industry in Singapore, because I think Singapore's quite unique in terms of the industry when it comes to footwear. I think if you look at the typical, especially for the men, on the weekends, most of our men are not even in shoes. They're either in flip-flops or sandals or something more casual. So I always knew that, yes, my training is in dress shoes, because what we learn when we're bespoke shoemaking apprentices is pure classic dress shoes. But I knew that at some point, if I wanted to build a viable business, I would have to explore the more casual options. So when I first started Heirloom, we had driving loafers as well as sneakers. So I think that was something which I would say more Singaporean men, were accustomed to wearing. And the following year in end of 2016, start of 2017, that's when I set up Palola, which is my ladies line. And interesting story behind that was because I met my co-founder, Jeremiah, for Palola, and we shared the same workshop space. And
was he also doing shoes?
So he was doing leather bags. So he used to have a company called J. Meyer's Company, and they were doing watch straps, leather accessories, and we were sharing the same workshop back in Joo Chiat. This was one of my first workshops. And I remember we were having a bak kut teh dinner at Joo Chiat, just nearby the workshop. And he asked me, can I teach him how to make a pair of shoes for his wife? I think he wanted to gift her a pair for Christmas. And I said, sure. I mean, he was already a craftsman of sorts, so he's got good hands. And teaching a craftsman is a lot easier than teaching someone who has no craftsmanship background at all. And it was during that whole process that we realized, hey, why should the men get all the good stuff? Why not offer something for the ladies as well? And that's how Palola started. Because when we first started, it was all made to order. So we didn't have anything off the rack. Every single pair was made to order, meaning the customer chose the color, customer chose the design. And obviously, as two men, what do we know what women like or would buy in terms of shoes, right? So in a way, it was one of those things where the right time, right place. And at that point in time, there were no other shoe brands out there offering made to order footwear, at least for the ladies. Most of the customized options and stuff were really reserved for the men. So I think it comes more from the tailoring side. Like you notice, even in the corporate world, most of the men, if they go out and make a suit or they make shirts, it's all tailored. But for some reason, the ladies just prefer to buy off the rack. Maybe because there's less options. But when we started Palola, we were the first brand out there that really gave women the option to customize their footwear. So that's how the whole journey started.
Right. So clarification, bespoke and make to order.
What's the difference?
Yes.
Right? It's a great question. I think it's a very common sort of mix up between the two terms. So when specifically for shoemaking, when we talk about made to order, it actually means that we still use standard size lasts. We might have them in different widths. But for example, if you're a 36, in a standard width, or you're 36 in a wide fit. What makes made to order different from off the rack is that you can mix and match, for example, your left foot and your right foot in different sizes if you need. So we have about probably 30% of my customers where their left foot's one size, right foot's another size. So you can only get that done under made to order. And obviously you can then customize the color of the leather. You can choose whatever leather you like from our selection, and then we'll basically make that pair specially for you. Now the difference between that and bespoke is quite a big difference. So for bespoke, we actually start by measuring the customer's feet. So for example, you come in for a fitting, we actually sit you down, I take out a measuring tape and I make a series of measurements so that I almost translate your foot into a series of numbers. And then once I've got that, I then proceed to make a bespoke pair of lasts. So a last is basically the mold that we make the shoe upon. And each bespoke customer has his or her own bespoke last. So we don't use that last to make anyone else's shoe. And after we've made the last, we do a set of fitting shoes, which is basically made using the same quality of leather as your final pair, just for the customer to test it out, make sure that there's no further modifications needed. And only after that, then we make the final pair. So there's a lot more work that goes involved. But yeah, essentially that's the main difference. But I think a lot of people kind of get the idea that bespoke just means custom. But actually, no. Bespoke is a lot more than just customizing the design or the color. It really starts with the measurements of the foot. So,
okay,
yeah.
cool. I want to bring you back because before you actually went to Florence and do that, I kind of want to know the wilderness phase. So I believe that there is a wilderness phase for people if they really want to find their passion. Like I went through 32 different jobs and businesses. So there's that wilderness where we were like, I try something first, then maybe it doesn't work, I try something else and all that. And a lot of times I see that pattern of erratic, just exploring. What happened to you when like, okay, so you love sneakers, you kind of love leather. What started a journey to like start to search, like, okay, does Florence have anything and things like, can I find something in Singapore? What happened between that?
Wow. Okay. So going back to my childhood then. So I was born to a family that is very, I would say, typical of a Singaporean family, meaning, parents both were wage earners. I've got two younger siblings. And kind of none of them were business owners. None of them were, I would say, your classic risk taker kind of personalities. So I think for me, I was a bit of the black sheep in the family in a way. So I went the usual path, primary school, secondary school, JC. And then I went to study in SMU for my degree. And then after graduating, I guess that was really the start of the whole wilderness phase where you're trying to figure out what do I want to do for the rest of my life, right? Yes. I started off in advertising sales. So I think when I studied in SMU, I actually majored in marketing and communications. Okay. So that was the field that I guess I was strong at. I wouldn't say I was necessarily passionate about it, but it was something that I was good at. I wasn't really good at all the numbers and the finance side of things, but I was quite passionate with advertising. So I wanted to see if I could carve out a career in advertising. Applied, I remember, at the time for a position at Ogilvy to be a creative. Naive, right? I mean, fresh out of university, don't know anything. And then during the interview, they kind of explained to me that if you're trying to apply for a job as a creative, you need a portfolio. Obviously, I had no portfolio. And they were like, we can only offer you a suit job, which is kind of as an account executive, right? And obviously that wasn't kind of where I wanted to go. So I had to scrap that. I went into sports advertising. So I sold basically media space at sports venues. So like golf courses, gyms, yacht clubs. So it wasn't really kind of the definition of advertising that I thought I would end up in, but it was a job, right? And I think that's really kind of it's till today, it's been the only real job I've had. And I did it. It was a 1-year contract. Exactly on the 1-year mark, I tendered my resignation. I said, I'm done with this. I'm not doing it anymore. And at the time, I was always coaching tennis part-time. So it was kind of, I guess, my first passion, if you want to call it, was really for tennis. So I started off as a competitive tennis player, all the way from the age of 7 all the way up. Played tennis for my schools. And when I first graduated from JC and I was doing my national service, the teacher in charge actually asked me to go back to coach the school team. So that's how I got started in tennis coaching. And then I kind of did it part-time all the way through university as well. And after I finished my 1-year contract with the advertising sales company, I figured, it pays decent. You get quite a lot of freedom. You get to do whatever you want to do. You can control how many hours a day you coach. So I decided to go into tennis coaching. So I did that for about 2 or 3 years.
So full-time tennis coaching?
Full-time tennis coaching.
Oh, wow.
Almost 7 days a week. Because the thing about tennis coaching is that in a way, you only work in the evenings or on the weekends, right? Because most people, they can only have their lessons either very early in the morning, or after work, and on the weekend. So you're working 7 days a week. But what I realized after doing it for a few years was that it's only going to get harder because it's a very physical career. Like you're in the sun,
and I was in the
sun. Yeah, and I was in the sun 6-7 hours a day. And you don't realize it, but even just standing there in the hot sun, even if you're not running around, it sucks a lot of your energy out and you feel exhausted at the end of the day. So I realized that, at that time I was about 26, 27, and I figured, do I really want to be, doing this kind of physical career for that many years? I figured, okay, if I'm going to do something different, now's the time. Before you get married, before you have any commitments, if you're going to take a risk and take a leap, this is when you do it. And I think that's where I made the decision, okay, I'm going to look for something else. And that's when I kind of started asking myself again, okay, what am I passionate about? What do I like? What can I see myself doing day in, day out for the next 20 years, 30 years, right? And that's where I revisited the idea of, okay, how do we combine, leather? So at the time as a hobby, I was just kind of making little leather accessories for friends and family, little coin pouches, card holders, and all that.
So you're already doing that?
Just dabbling, but
Yeah,
no
but
professional
was it,
training.
during your advertising, during
It was during my tennis coaching days. So
Okay.
literally when I'm not coaching tennis, which is kind of during the hottest times of the day.
Yeah.
So between 10 to 3, 10 in the morning to 3 in the afternoon, it's nothing to do, right? So kind of picked up a hobby of leather crafting.
Right. But where did it come from? Because
so
like,
it was
you need equipment, you need like, supplies,
so
all that.
literally, I remember I did a trip, or I made a trip to Tokyo. And again, Japan is one of these places where craftsmanship is so popular and so in demand.
Yeah.
I remember going to Tokyo Hands, and this is before Tokyo Hands was even in Singapore.
Mm-hmm.
And they sold a very small range of like leather crafting tools and materials and stuff. So that was where I got my first set. Tokyo Hands, right? And then brought it back to Singapore, and then kind of just off YouTube, just kind of self-taught and just dabble in.
And so what was the first few products you did?
So I made a little coin pouch for my mum, like a little zippered coin pouch.
Okay.
Because for those of you that do leather craft, you'll know that making a zip is actually it's not as easy as you would think it would be.
Yeah.
So I was quite proud of that. And my mom still uses it till today. So she keeps all her coins in that little pouch. Even though, when I look at it now, I'm like, oh my God, it's the ugliest thing ever. But I guess for her, a mother's love, right?
Yeah.
So that was the first sort of little...
so that's your first dabble with leather craftsmanship.
Yeah.
But nothing to do with shoes yet?
No, nothing to do with shoes. And then when I went to Italy to learn from the school...
No, before that. So before you go, you're doing craft, and then take me through the journey. That means when you're doing craft at home during the hottest hours of the day, you're doing that. Do you try to sell it? Do you try to go online? Do you try to carousel it? What do you do?
It wasn't good enough to sell, to be honest.
Okay.
And I think that was a big part of the decision why I felt I needed proper training.
Right.
Because no matter how kind of many hours I would spend on YouTube and stuff, there's a lot of the tricks that you don't see and I bought even leather crafting books. And there's a lot of things which I only realized later on when I was actually doing a proper apprenticeship that there's a lot of these little nuggets of wisdom or of skill that you only learn from observing a true master at work.
Right.
And that's when I realized, after kind of dabbling in for a while, I was like, I'm not going anywhere. I'm like, you can get a little bit better, like progressively better, but if you want to get like exponentially better, you need a proper master to mentor you. There's only so far that you can go by yourself. So I think that's how I made the decision to start looking for a mentor or looking for someone to give me training.
So why not find in Singapore?
At the time, there was really no kind of professional craftsman.
Right.
There wasn't even a school or anything like that I found in Italy, where they focus purely on sort of traditional, handcrafted, almost vocational trades. So there wasn't anything in
nothing
Singapore
in the region.
at all. This was like 2014, 2015.
Right.
Singapore, to be honest, at that point was actually moving, I think, away from manufacturing. So they were moving more towards like services, especially financial services and all that. And we used to have, interesting story, we used to have shoe factories in Singapore that produced shoes for the departmental stores and stuff, but they all closed down kind of by the late 1990s, just because it wasn't viable. Labor costs were going up, cost of production was going up. So, because of that, we didn't have any more craftsmen left in Singapore. Anyone who owned or had anything to do with a shoe factory just closed down the business. So there was no one teaching. There were no schools. The only lessons that you could get were maybe from other craftsmen around. But even then, everyone was kind of just self-taught in a way.
Right. So there wasn't
an organized.
No. It wasn't like these people have done it for 20, 30 years and then they are like the best of their best in class, that kind of thing. So you were doing all these things and then you kind of like, okay, I need to learn from a master.
Yep.
I can't just keep going to YouTube and all that. I need to just carry on. So then you searched, and why search Italy? Why not everywhere else? Like maybe even in Japan. Why not Japan?
So I think if I had if I had made the journey today, it would have been very different, just because I think Japan has really opened up and become a mecca of sorts, especially for shoemaking. But got to remember, this is, 7, almost 8 years ago. I think back then there were really good craftsmen in Japan, but I think language was always the big issue. So unless you spoke Japanese or you were willing to learn Japanese, There wasn't anyone that was going to be able to communicate or teach you.
Okay.
But that being said, today, if I were to advise someone to go, on their journey, I would actually say Japan is the first choice that I would recommend, even though I'm Italian trained.
Right.
But of course, back then, so even for Italy, the level of English, my master doesn't speak any English at all. So he was literally the stereotypical 80-year-old Italian shoemaker. Like if you were just imagine a stereotype of a shoemaker, white hair, glasses, apron, a bit of a belly, a little bit grumpy sometimes. That's Angelo, exactly.
Okay.
I mean, I love the man to bits because he was almost like a grandfather to me for the 3-4 months that I was learning from him.
Right.
But essentially, the only place that I could find that had a proper kind of course, a proper syllabus, was in Florence. So I did explore other places, but I figured if you're gonna go into a craft, that involves leather, you want to go to the birthplace of high quality leather and leather goods.
Yes.
And I figured Italy would be a good place to start. So that's how I really ended up shortlisting that place.
Right.
In fact, I did a recce trip before I enrolled at the school. So I went to Italy just to check out the school to make sure it's legit, right? You don't want to go all the way there, pay all that money to learn, and then you realize it's just some hole in the wall, and the guy training you is not even a real shoemaker.
Yeah.
But yeah, so he used to kind of make shoes for Gucci, Prada in the big factories in Italy.
Yeah.
So he's been in the industry. He was telling us that he's been making shoes since he was 15.
Wow.
So, I mean, and at the time when he was teaching me, he was 75. So he's been making shoes for like 60 years.
6 years. Wow.
And I mean, he's seen anything, any shoe design, like he's seen all the trends. He knows how to make every kind of shoe you can imagine. He's like this huge wealth of shoemaking information.
Right.
And he's so generous. And, it's one of those things where the amount that you learn as an apprentice or as a student, it really depends on how generous your mentor or your master is. And again, I only have nice words to say about him because he never held anything back. He just taught everything that you asked. As long as you're willing to learn, he would be willing to teach. So
okay.
Yeah.
So you went there and you mentioned just now that you were doing a kind of like craftsmaking kind of course where you learn about many different things.
Yep.
Was he the person teaching for the shoe
So
module?
he was the shoe module.
Right.
I also did a bag making module. So these were the two modules that I took when I was in the school.
Okay. So there was a school you can you mentioned
basically
stained
choose
glass and everything.
Exactly.
Right.
So depending on what interests you have, you can
for that.
select the different courses. For me, it was bag making and shoemaking.
Okay.
So I originally thought I would like bag making more. I just took shoemaking because since I'm there already,
Oh, so it's
why
by
not?
chance.
In a way, it was by chance. I never thought I would fall in love with shoemaking.
Right. Okay.
Because when I first dabbled in leathercraft back in Singapore as a hobby, it wasn't shoemaking. It was making leather goods, right? Leather accessories. And when I went there and I started learning shoemaking, within like the first 2 lessons, I was hooked.
That was you.
I knew that was it.
Right,
that was it.
right.
And that was kind of that aha kind of moment. It's like, not that I don't like bag making. I still like it. But I think shoemaking is so different from bag making. And I mean, in terms of the steps, the techniques, and the technical aspect of making a pair of shoes, it's so much more challenging than the making of a bag. I think when it comes to making a bag, don't get me wrong, it is a craft in itself. But I think a lot of the skill when it comes to bag making is in designing that unique kind of silhouette, understanding how the bag looks when it's carried and all that. So it's a lot more on the design. The actual assembly of the bag is a bit more straightforward generally. Whereas for shoemaking, I mean, there's literally probably close to 100 different steps. And if at any of those steps you mess up, you screw up, the whole shoe is ruined, right? And you can't, it's not like, let's say when you deal with fabric, let's say, for example, when you sew, on a sewing machine, a piece of fabric, if you sew it wrong, you just unpick the stitches, right? Because the holes will close back up. On a piece of leather, once the needle goes in, that's it.
Right.
The hole is there, it's permanent.
But there's also that idea of like, bags, there's no feedback mechanism. Oh, this is not a comfortable bag. But for shoes, it's like,
in a way, I mean, the bag's never going to give you a blister, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Let's put it that way. It's never going to bite you.
Yeah, but for shoes is that then the amount of perfection that needs to be done is so much higher than bags.
It's not just aesthetic.
Yeah.
So I think
it's the comfort as well.
Yeah. So what makes a good pair of shoes? Yeah. It's not just the design, obviously. It's not just the material, but it's the whole mechanics behind the shoe. Understanding how to make the last.
Yeah.
Or even if you're gonna start, for example, an off the rack line, like how do you select a last that is going to be comfortable, that's going to fit? And again, you're never going to be able to fit every single customer, every single pair of feet. That's why we have bespoke, right?
Right.
But of course, you're trying your best to fit as many people's feet, unique feet as possible, just so that your shoes will fit the majority of people. So I think that's really the challenge when it comes to shoemaking, because it's not just a matter of just, come up with a really nice looking pair of shoes, but no one's going to wear it, no matter how nice it is, if the shoe's going to give them blisters or it's going to hurt and stuff.
That's true.
So I think that's, again, there's so many different challenges when it comes to the footwear industry, but I loved it from, I think, the second lesson. I remember because the first lesson, we learned how to make an apron. So literally, you go into the class, everyone is like super green, right?
Why?
Because you need to protect yourself. So the first thing that my master taught us all to make, before you even touch a pair of shoes, is you first make your apron. And I'm still using that same apron that I made on the first lesson till today. So that apron's got to be like, 2014 to now. It's like 8 years old. It's got holes. It's worn out. It's got sweat stains and stuff, but I love it. I'll never throw that apron away because, it's the first thing you really make. And then second lesson onwards, that's when we start kind of even just scraping the surface of it. And ironically, the first pair of shoes I ever made was a lady's shoe. Even though I first started the business, I did men's shoes, but the first pair of shoes that they teach us how to make is like a classic ladies slingback, if I remember. Yeah.
Share with me when you were in that second lesson, because I'm curious about is that the last time you talked about shoes was when you had sneakers when you were younger, and you didn't talk about it, that passion for shoes or interest for shoes didn't come out at all. Throughout your entire life, the leather came out, but there wasn't shoes. But then when at Florence and that second lesson, something kind of like accumulated to say that this was it. Share with me what happened during that second lesson
phase, I guess.
Second lesson especially is like what clicked in your mind is like, hey, I actually really enjoy this. It brought back memories of how I really enjoy so many different kinds of sneakers. What happened in that lesson?
So I think why, and even I've asked myself, how come I didn't think of doing shoes as the first option?
Yeah.
I never connected the difference between being the consumer and I guess the business owner or the craftsman in a way. So I always enjoyed shoes as a consumer. So meaning I loved buying shoes, I loved shopping for shoes, I loved wearing the shoes.
Yeah.
I think at that point, I always just viewed shoes more as my favorite thing to consume, my favorite thing to buy. And then it was only later on when I delved into the craft of it. So in the second lesson, when I was under Angelo and I realized, oh wow, so like not only are there 100 different steps of shoemaking, but each of the different steps contributes to the next step. So what I mean by that is, for example, step 1, if you don't do it perfectly, step 2 becomes more difficult, which will then make step 3 more difficult, and so on and so forth.
It's like a snowball exponentially.
Exactly. So by the time you reach step 50, if you've messed up the first 49 steps, it's a nightmare. You basically have a Frankenstein shoe. And that was kind of like the code name that we had for all of us students. Whenever we messed up a shoe really bad, we'd be like, oh, look, it's a Frankenstein shoe over there, because it doesn't look like a shoe, let's put it this way.
Right.
So I think that was something which really appealed to me.
Yeah.
Because it's kind of one of those things where you can't just fast forward to the end and just do the last step properly and kind of hope that it masks all the mistakes that you made earlier on. It forces you to really, in a way, be in the moment. So each single step that you take, you have to do it to the best of your abilities, because you know that it's going to then affect the subsequent steps. I think that was really when I realized what was going on. And I realized this very early on, because so there's different students, right? And different students have a different way of learning. So some of my classmates, and I hope none of them are watching this, but anyway, I'm not going to mention names. So some of them actually had a very different approach. So they were kind of learning shoemaking, but they were always in a hurry to see the finished product.
Right.
So they were always looking at step 100, right? They want to see what the final pair of shoes looks like. And because of that, they kind of neglect all the earlier steps, or they rush through the earlier steps. So just to share with you, I was always the last in my class. I was the slowest. I was the one that was always having to redo everything, because I'm a bit of a perfectionist by nature.
Right.
Because of that, every time I made even the smallest mistake, I would throw it away and restart it again. And even my master used to look at me and be like, Josh, why are you still on step 1 or step 2? Everyone's on like step 10 and you're still redoing and redoing and redoing.
Right.
And it was just something which I quickly realized that if you don't do these earlier steps, it's gonna make the whole shoe a nightmare to make. And that's what happened to a lot of my classmates. So a lot of my classmates, after learning, they didn't pursue careers in shoemaking. They went back to what they were doing before.
So it's like a hobby, lah.
It was
Nice
kind of like
thing to
a
learn,
sabbatical, in a way, and they just didn't. Either they couldn't stand it because they weren't patient enough or whatever.
Right.
But yeah, I think that the nature of shoemaking and how each step contributes to the next was the thing that really captivated me about the whole craft. And again, it's something which is very in line with my personality, because whatever I do, I don't know, it's something, maybe it's a form of OCD in a way,
right?
But I have to do it like as perfectly as I can. If not, I just feel really uncomfortable. So yeah.
Right. So share with me then after that, when you was under Angelo.
Yep.
Then what next after that? After 3 months, you took a shoe, you went and then asked for apprenticeship.
So literally, as I mean, it's almost like you write a storybook, right? So I went to see Tommaso. Tommaso is the CEO of Stefano Bemmer. So Stefano Bemmer, he passed away by the time I went to his shop or his bespoke studio to ask for an apprenticeship. But the CEO was there, so he actually bought over the brand. And I showed him, a pair of shoes that I made, and obviously I told him that I was taught by Angelo. And I think it wasn't the shoe that got me the apprenticeship. It was Angelo who or knowing that I was taught by Angelo, that actually allowed me to, I guess, get a foot in.
Okay.
Because I entered the program a lot later than the other apprentices. The other apprentices had started 3 months before that. So they kind of, were already, by the time I joined, they had already done all the basics and stuff with the bespoke shoemakers.
So there was a program, actual program.
It's like an apprenticeship program in a way.
So it's like a 1 year, 2 year, 3 years?
Depends how long you want to stay. So minimum, you can stay 6 months. Okay. You can extend further, obviously depending on your financial, resources.
Yeah.
And obviously also depending on your skill. So you don't get offered to stay unless you're, one of the better ones.
Okay.
If not, a lot of them, after maybe 6 months, they might just leave and either go back to their previous jobs or, go and find another apprenticeship.
Right.
But yeah, literally I took and I still remember the pair that I made, because it was the first pair that I made for someone that was, I guess, in a way wearable. So it was actually a pair that I made for my dad. Interesting story behind that was because I think, so my parents are both doctors. Again, like I said, very stereotypical, conservative, non-risk taker kind of people, right? And my dad, I think when I first told him I was going to go to Italy and learn to be a shoemaker, he almost fainted. Because imagine for him, I mean, he kind of, it's the last career he would ever think his eldest son would choose, right?
I think for parents, like especially Singapore, there are white collar and there are blue collar. It's kind of like, it's like you work with your hands or you work with your mind, that kind of thing. So sometimes parents will be like, hey, actually, if you can, maybe because you got a university degree and all that, why don't you go for something that's a little bit more cushy, a little bit more office aircon kind of thing, rather than like work with your hands.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think in our parents' generation, I think they always get confused between shoemaker and cobbler. So I think it's very common. So obviously cobbler deals with used shoes mostly, because you're repairing, right? Whereas for shoemakers, generally we work with new shoes, and we're making a brand new shoe. So again, they kind of had this idea that I was going to be, just my aspiration in life was to just be a cobbler. Nothing wrong with it. It's just that I think they probably wanted me to have like you said, an easier life, and not to have to kind of resort to using my hands to make a living for myself. So when I first told him, he was, I guess, shocked in a way. He didn't quite believe that. Maybe he just thought I was going there for a holiday. Or
just a phase in your life, lah.
Yeah, one of those things. And
let Josh go for his.
And if you come back crying and then be like, no, I'll go and I'll
go back to advertising.
Join an office job, just normal corporate job, right? So I knew that when I came back, if I wanted to kind of prove to him that I was gonna make something of this, he would be the first, I guess, naysayer that I would have to convince that I know what I'm doing. So he was the first person I intentionally wanted to make a pair of shoes, and he still wears that pair till today. It's and that was the same pair that I brought to Stefano Bemmer to kind of ask, is it good enough? Will you take me in as an apprentice?
So that's like a resume.
Yeah, it's your portfolio.
Portfolio, yes.
In a way, right? Because he don't care, what's your educational background. No, he cares what can you make with your hands. How good are your hands? But yeah, that was an interesting kind of tidbit that I thought I'd share, just because when I look back on the whole journey, I think these are the things that I remember, because having that ecosystem or that support system really allowed me to then, I guess, in a way, pursue my passion, right? Because I think if I didn't have parents that would even entertain something as crazy as going to Italy and learning to be a shoemaker, I probably wouldn't have ended up there. And I'd just be in a typical corporate job, like 99% of my peers, I guess. Yeah.
So once you finished everything, you came back to Singapore.
Yep.
When was the time when you felt that, okay, I want to really set up something? And probably when you first started out, you probably won't go and get an office and do everything, right? You just buy as much leather as you need at home and try to do it. Was that what happened?
So literally my workshop for the first almost 1 year when I came back was in my living room in my house. And you've been to my house. Literally I set up my sewing machine, I set up my workstation kind of, in the middle of my mom's living room. She hated it. She was like, when are you going to get your leather and your tools out of my living room? Because for 1 year, nobody could use the living room because it was just a mess, right? All my stuff was all over the place. But again, like you said, I wasn't ready to even start selling shoes. So literally even after making that first pair for my dad, the first few commissions that I did, it was just for friends and family. I just basically charged them the cost of materials. That's all. Like, I wasn't even making any money on the pairs, because I knew that I needed more experience. So you need to get as many shoes under your belt as you can. And that's something, as a craftsman, there's no amount of theory or learning can replace actual making. And so I knew that I needed customers, right? And the best way to get a customer is to say, hey, I'm going to make you a pair of shoes. It's going to cost you nothing, basically. You just pay me for the leather, and that's it. You don't have to pay me for my time and all that. I'll make you a free pair of shoes. And that's how I started. I remember a second pair I made was for a very good friend of mine who was getting married. So I made his wedding shoes.
Okay.
Then I made another couple of pairs for other close friends and all that. And it was only after I think I made probably close to the first 18 or 19 pairs.
Wow.
And then I was like, I think we can start taking orders. And that was kind of when I moved out my mom's living room, gave her living room back, and I rented my first, I guess, workshop in a way. So it was a very old walk-up apartment, I remember, at near Newton, called Gilstead Mansion. I don't even know if it's still there now. But it was a ground floor walk-up apartment, and it was a 2-bedroom apartment. So I just, the living room was where I saw my customers. One of the bedrooms was basically where I would make the shoes. The other bedrooms where I stored all the leather and all that. So that was the setup in a way. And I was a one-man show. There was nobody else helping me. Those are tough times.
So when you rented that place and all that, there was a big bold move, right? Yeah, because did you already have many orders coming in, and that's why you rented, or was it that you rent first and okay, I hope this works out?
It was really one of those, like, just take a leap of faith. You put the deposit down, and that's when shit gets real, right? Literally,
it's real, man.
And it's scary, man, because you're doing something, and you gotta remember this was 2015. Back in 2015, there was no bespoke. Like, the idea of a bespoke shoemaker, it's not even a career that people even heard of. And same thing from a consumer point of view. Like, customers, 99% of customers, especially in Singapore, didn't even know that the option for bespoke shoes existed. So it wasn't like something which, like, I know 10 other bespoke shoemakers. I was like the only crazy guy, doing such a niche product.
Right.
So it was a really scary time. And I think I was fortunate in a way that the fact that not many people did it also kind of added to the novelty.
Yes.
So it was quite easy to get picked up by the media and stuff when they found out that, there's this crazy Singaporean guy being a shoemaker and stuff.
Exactly.
Let's give him some press coverage and stuff. So I think that
helped you.
That helped a lot. So again, the earlier, shout out to those earlier journalists from all the different media publications that featured me.
Yes.
That were willing to kind of, I guess, take a leap or, give.
But it's an interesting story.
It was novel. It was novel, right?
Right.
So it's one of those things where you don't hear about it every day. And I think that kind of built my name and built the brand and all that kind of stuff.
So what, you set up a website and this you had friends refer friends?
Yeah. So I think at the start it was really all by referrals.
Yes. Okay.
So it's a really painful kind of way to grow a business, right? Because it's really slow.
Yes.
You start, and obviously social media helped a lot.
Yeah.
But again, got to remember, this was pre-TikTok, pre-video and stuff. We were in the age of images. And it wasn't the same trying to kind of, I guess, market a bespoke shoe brand as it would be today. Like today, it's so much different. Like how I would, if I were to set up the whole thing again, how I would market the brand would be so different than how it was 7-8 years ago. But of course, social media helped, referrals helped, the
Press
media,
helped,
press coverage helped a ton. But
so you started to get orders
gradually.
Right.
But even then, you get a lot more surprised customers when they find out the price and they find out how long it takes. So for every 10 inquiries, you might get one that comes down to make an appointment, or sometimes even less than that.
Right.
And then, whether or not they actually buy a pair is a totally different story, right? So there was a lot of educating in a way, because the market was such a new product that the market wasn't quite, they'd never even heard of this concept before. So yeah.
Okay, then from there, if you fast forward then to now you're kind of like wearing a little bit of hat of a business owner, right? Not only just that craftsman. So what was that transition to say that, okay, I'm going to set up different things now? Because the more you set up things, the more you have less time with your craft. And if your passion was that craft, then it's like, what made you want to do that then?
So I think when I realized that I was sort of setting up the business, this is for the bespoke side. So when I was setting up my bespoke brand, I realized that I didn't want to fall into the same trap that I was in previously with tennis coaching, where you're essentially just earning an hourly wage, right, as a tennis coach, where you can't really scale the business. The only way to scale a business is to kind of open an academy, hire more tennis coaches. Similarly, as a bespoke shoemaker, like I only make 2 pairs of shoes a month. So an entire year, you're looking at 24, 25 pairs tops. And no matter how many orders I get, even if I get 100 orders a year, it just means my wait list becomes 4 years. That's all. It doesn't mean I make 100 pairs that year. So I think I knew very quickly that if I wanted to scale the business, I would need to have some product lines or some other brands that were more scalable. I.e., I wasn't the one involved in the crafting as much. So I think that's where Heirloom came around. So for Heirloom, again, I always knew I wanted to come back to sneakers. Right? I think that was something which I promised myself I would come back to it. My first love. And I knew that I wanted to do something a bit different. So obviously I can't compete with the Nikes of the world, the Adidas of the world, because they're huge brands, right? And similarly, I knew that I didn't want to do an off-the-rack dress shoe brand. More because I felt in Singapore, most of the target audience, they're not really wearing dress shoes. Most of us are more casual. You're wearing either loafers or sneakers these days. So I wanted to kind of do something in between. So I kind of coined the term dress sneaker. So it's kind of like a very classic style sneaker using dress shoe leather, the same leather that we can use for bespoke dress shoes. But obviously with a much more casual aesthetic. So I think that's kind of where I realized, okay, I want to use this line to then scale. So I went to find a factory in Italy that was able to produce it to the quality that I wanted. And then I started that brand. And then when it came to Palola, Palola again was something that I co-founded with Jeremiah. So it was something, and Jeremiah was facing very similar problems to me because he was doing bespoke bags and leather goods. And again, he couldn't scale as well, right? So he found himself having to sometimes resort to taking corporate orders just to keep, food on the table, literally. And it's a tough way to kind of grow a business. So we figured, let's try and see how do we use our skill set, how do we use our passion, and then grow something that's scalable. And so how we started Palola was we started by finding the production first. So instead of thinking about the product and kind of designing a product, we actually went about it the other way around. So let's go and find a production. And we couldn't find a factory that would produce the shoes the way we wanted it. Because don't forget, we were doing only made to order. And no factory, out there is going to just produce one pair for you because they're not going to do it. So we had to buy our own factory. So that's literally how we started Palola. We bought a factory in JB. That's where the factory is till today. And literally, I would drive across the causeway 4 or 5 times a week to train the shoemakers there. So we started with just one shoemaker, and it was myself and Jeremiah. So the 3 of us would sit there till 2 a.m. in the morning in our little factory in JB, producing every single pair that we made. But I knew that eventually, if I can train more shoemakers, we would be able to scale. So now over there, we have a whole team of shoemakers that all make shoes the same way that I was taught. And that has allowed me to then focus on, I guess, scaling the business. But you're absolutely right in the sense that it does take me away from the craft. And the craft was what I fell in love with in the first place, right? And I think that's why I made a very deliberate decision to keep Josh Leong as my bespoke line. So I will hopefully, never say never, but as of this point, I'm only going to be offering bespoke shoes under Josh Leong. Even if it means I only do 2 pairs a month, that's fine, because then at least it gives me an outlet for me to then make, shoes and keep in touch with the craft, while Heirloom and Palola then allow me to then scale, my businesses. That essentially puts food on my table, because to be very frank, my bespoke line, it doesn't make money. It's more of something that I do purely out of passion. But my revenue generating businesses are Heirloom and Palola.
Right.
Yeah.
It's interesting because whenever we in business we see that bottleneck, you can either scale in terms of quantity and all that. You can also scale in terms of price. So if I think just wearing that business hat for a while, why not increase that price to a point where that makes sense to you? That means, for example, if it's now like 9,000, then why not 20,000? Is it so ridiculous, or what is it?
I think it's a combination of the appetite of the market, meaning what is your market willing to pay?
Got it.
Or what do they define as, I guess, acceptable? Like, do they think that your product is worth that price?
Okay.
I think the biggest challenge is that because it's such a new product, such a niche product, and not many people have been exposed to bespoke shoemaking and the prices in general. So because of that, I think when a lot of people find out the price of the shoes, even at my current pricing, they already find that it's a price that they would never in a million years dream of paying for a pair of shoes, right?
Okay.
So I think that's one thing. The other aspect also is in terms of time. So even if you up the price or whatever, the amount of time that it takes to make that pair of shoes, it stays the same, because you can't quicken it, you can't shorten that amount of time anymore, because then you compromise the quality of the product, right? So I think because of that, I was quite deliberate in the sense to, rather than raise the price to a point where either the market doesn't accept it, or and it might affect the business, you reduce the number of customers you have. I preferred to look at other ways to scale, that were, I guess, that were more doable than raising the prices to a astronomical height, I guess.
Okay. I do believe that sometimes when it comes to passion, people have a very vague idea or very fluffy idea of passion. So I actually define passion to 3 parts, right? One part is interest, where you can talk about it forever. The other one is strengths, where you have a knack for it. And then the other one is values. Just want to find out from you, for your interests, you had interest in sneakers and leather. Were there any other interests that you could have explored and then it could have been something?
Yeah.
What other interests do you have besides these 2?
So I think growing up...
in tennis.
I was always, I was always a sports person. I love tennis. Another sport that I love, but I don't play so much now, is golf. So tennis was, I guess it was at one point a career for me. I mean, I was coaching tennis full time for at least 3-4 years. But again, it was one of those things where the idea of opening a tennis academy, which is the scalable arm of a tennis business, right?
All the trainers.
It wasn't appealing to me.
Okay.
Because it was, in a way, you take yourself off the court and all you're doing is managing a bunch of coaches, right?
The business.
You're managing the business. And I think that was something that I wasn't passionate about.
Right. So for you, somehow or rather, you need to be in the business.
Unfortunately. And again, it's a double-edged sword, right?
It is.
They always tell you that as the business grows, you got to take yourself away from the product.
Stop flipping the burgers.
Yeah, but I love flipping the damn burgers. You know what I mean? That's the thing. So but I have to consciously sometimes remind myself that I'm now responsible not just for myself, but I've got my staff, I've got business partners, I've got shareholders that I'm accountable to.
Okay.
And as much as I would love to just not have anyone talk to me and just sit in my workshop and make shoes all day, there are days sometimes I don't even touch shoes. I have to focus on the other parts of the business and stuff.
So what are the interests besides that? Tennis and anything
tennis,
else?
golf. I'm an avid poker player. I love playing poker. More because I think it's one of those things where not so much the gambling aspect. So like when I go into a casino, I don't play anything else.
Right.
Like literally, I just go in and the only game I would play is poker.
Right.
More because I like the idea of kind of, I guess pitting your wits against someone else.
Yeah.
And obviously the money is the side aspect. I don't play poker for the money, but it's more of just being able to, I guess, do battle. So I'm a relatively, I'm quite competitive by nature.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things where I've always loved games. Any kind of game, whether it's a sport, card game, like poker or whatever. It's one of those things.
So generally, you're very competitive.
Generally.
So even for friendly games, you are all in.
Well, I mean, if it's a friendly game, it's, if it's a social game, to be honest, of course, you're there for a different aspect. But if let's say you're playing a casino where you don't know any of these guys, I'm going to not leave any money on the table, or if I can, right? Okay. So that's kind of, it's in my nature, I guess. Right. But I think poker is one of those things where it teaches you a lot about life as well. Mm-hmm. Kind of how do you maintain your cool? How do you not get emotional when you lose a big pot? Yeah. How do you kind of out-level your opponent with just your mind, right? That's essentially it. Yep. And there's a lot of things that you can learn from poker that you can apply to your real life as well, especially in the business world, which is something which I had to learn the hard way, right? Because I started off as a craftsman. Yes. And to then transition into the business world, and as the business grows, wearing the business owner's hat hasn't always been easy. Yeah.
Totally different skill sets.
Totally different. Yeah. And I like flipping the burger,
Right.
So
okay. So you had interest, and of all the interests, there was tennis. How about the marketing and advertising? Was that interest
so I
as
think, I wouldn't say it was interest as much as it was something that I was naturally good at.
Okay.
So when I was in business school, so I did business management in SMU. Yeah. And obviously business management is a very generic kind of degree. They run you through the whole gamut of 101s, right? You study everything from business law to basic accounting to basic economics, and obviously you've got marketing 101, communications 101. And I found that I naturally gravitated towards the marketing communications module just because I just tended to do better in those modules. So that was what pulled up my GPA at the end of the day. So I guess in a way I made the mistake of, I guess, considering a career just because I was good at something and not because I was really interested in it. And I think that's probably why I ended up not lasting more than a year in the industry.
So the very funny thing about what you just said was that a lot of people out there, they kind of mix this whole idea of strengths to things that they're good at. The funny thing is that when I do actually have a quadrant that I share and I teach, is that you have competency, high and low competency, but you also have this thing called energy.
And they have to match up.
Either whether it's energizing to you or draining to you. Yes. So there are places in our life where we are competent, but we are drained.
It sucks your energy
out. It sucks the life out of you, like holding on to like damn kryptonite with Superman. But you're good at it. Yeah. So we call that quadrant hollow endeavor. Right? The other quadrant where you're highly competent and you're fully energized. That means 3 hours just went by like that.
And it doesn't feel like work, basically.
It doesn't feel like work. Yeah. It feels a little bit like play and all that. And we call that primal greatness. So there's a big difference, but most people don't see it that way. Because if I'm your boss, you're good at something, guess what? I think you like it. Yeah. And guess what? I'll give you more. So
and that just, it's a never-ending kind of spiral, right?
Which is scary. Then you get higher and higher. A bigger and bigger part of your portfolio is the things that is your hollow endeavor, which is you're competent, but
you hate the living daylights out of it. Yeah.
So you would say that for marketing and advertising, there was very much there.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think it was one of those things. I was good at it. Those were the A's that I got when I was in university. Right. And because of that, I kind of, I guess, figured, since I'm doing decent at it,
should be that path.
Should be that path, right? What do you know when you're like 23, 24?
True.
I was a kid almost in that sense, right? So, but I think that's why I later on I realized that you can't just be good at it and choose your career based on that. Yeah. But if not, it's because most of us are going to be working the majority of our lives. Yeah, right? Man. And you want to make sure whatever you're doing day in, day out, it's something which, at least you're interested in, if not passionate about. Yeah.
So the funny thing about that also is that because human beings are so complex and so diverse, there are some people who are okay with a job being a job. And they just have hobbies on a Saturday and Sunday, and they're okay with them. But there are some individuals that can't do that. Yeah. So maybe like you can't, I can't, right? It has to align. It has to kind of overlap that. I want to do interesting things. It's kind of like I want to do something interesting, but yet I want to do something interesting, challenging, but also it pays me as well. Yeah. So there are also a few group of people who are like that. And I've seen that coaching so many different people, some people are just okay with that. Like our parents, our grandparents, they don't care about self-fulfillment. They don't care about
money-generating activity.
It's just sustenance, and that's it. And that's it. You do your duty. It's like NS, you do your duty, come back, and that's it.
It's your obligation to your family.
And then after 7 p.m. is your life, and Saturday and Sunday is your life. And that's okay for, I do feel that a lot of people, and that's fine. But there's a small group of people who can't take it. And then they go and try ridiculous things, and then hopefully something sticks. Right? So the second part of passion is interesting, is the strengths part, where you have a natural ability to kind of like see things or do things. Where do you think your strengths are when it comes to this?
So I think, obviously aside from marketing and communications, which were, I guess, my strengths or areas that I was strong in school, what I realized is that along the way, along this whole journey from going from a craftsman to becoming a business owner, I've learned to kind of balance out the two different hats. And specifically with regards to being, for example, detail-oriented versus big picture. So obviously detail-oriented, referring more to the craftsman hat, where you're focusing on the minute little details and getting every detail as perfect as you can, right? That's what makes a perfect shoe. Versus looking at it as a business owner, where you can't just always get caught up on the details. And I think a lot of times I learned about this the hard way. You know, when I first I remember when I first hired my first staff, you know, I would often kind of, and again, sorry to, you know who you are, I would micromanage the hell out of them, which I realize now is the most horrible way to be a boss. Like, micromanaging, nobody likes a micromanaging boss, but that's because that was in my nature, right? And over time and in a lot of kind of sort of like self-reflection after, I realized that, hey, you know, you have to wear different hats at different times and balance out. You know, there's a time to be big picture, and there's also a time to be nitty-gritty details. And I think I would like to think that now that I'm, you know, 7-8 years into the journey, I've been able to kind of manage that whole aspect. So I think that's probably one of my strengths, which then has allowed me to continue to be a craftsman, but at the same time, you know, grow a successful business or businesses. Because if you can't juggle those two hats properly, you're only going to be good at either or. And, you know, then you would probably need to hire or work, you know, find a partner that can complement you in a way. So I think that's, I would say, my biggest strength.
I do feel from this conversation that what is like more and more apparent for me is that the perfection part, the meticulous part, the attention to details is a strength that you had since.
It's
that idea that I want to see that one that thread to be exactly the same. For example, I don't know, that measurement as the other one. And that helped you to kind of like do well in shoemaking. Right? And that is that attention to small details that you kind of like, it comes naturally for you.
So I think the reason why I don't bring it up necessarily only as a strength is because I see it as a double-edged sword.
It is, yes.
Because, for example, it's fine when I'm making a pair of shoes to be anal and, you know, perfectionist.
Which is you yourself.
Which is me, my natural self, right? But when I'm, for example, doing accounts, or if I'm doing something which, you know, it doesn't necessarily grow the business, but it's more like it's one of those compliance things. And then like I insist on the formatting of my Excel sheet being perfect, which takes, you know, an extra 2 hours. And like I could have used that 2 hours to do something else in the business, right? And you know, that's when I see it as also something which kind of hinders me.
That is true. When I do coaching for strengths as well, every strength you have. So the interesting thing in life is that the weaknesses, the things that people complain about you or me are the very strengths that we have used unwisely. So your attention to detail,
wrong place, wrong
is
time.
great. Yeah, so wrong place, right thing, but maybe wrong time, that kind of thing. So the last thing interesting is that this whole idea of values is part of my definition of passion. And I have a value of, for example, adventure. And that's why I want to do a lot of different things, right? What is your value and the value is something that you live out almost like, this helps me to live out my value. What would that be for you?
So I think if I had to look at it from a value point of view in terms of what motivates me or what gets me out of bed every day, right? I would say I have two values. One, obviously, I've already brought up earlier in the conversation, which is that whole idea of perfectionism, but more in the sense of, in terms of when I deliver something to a client or to a business partner or to you know, a brand that we happen to be collaborating with. making sure that I do it to the best of my ability,
Yep.
and sparing no expense, right? Meaning there's no compromise. And this is something which, if any of my customers, have bought shoes from any of my brands,
Yep.
they will know that I don't compromise.
Right.
Like, it's something which has helped me to grow to where I am. It's also what has given me I would like to think, a positive reputation in the industry.
Right.
Just because I would rather lose money on that pair,
Yeah.
but deliver it to the standards that I promised you, than just kind of give you a half-ass job and then the shoe is not at the right standard.
Okay.
So I think that level of perfectionism, I would say, is something that I strive to achieve every single day. And it's not just in the craft, but every aspect of the business, of course, without letting it affect the growth of the business. I try to do my best in every function of the business as much as I can.
Right.
My other value, I would say, would be more in terms of just making sure that I'm accountable. And the strength of my word is important. And again, I think I shared this with you earlier, but when a customer comes to buy a bespoke pair of shoes, they go home with nothing in their hands, but they've left with a huge hole in their pocket. So essentially, all you're really selling is a promise or my word, right? Because sometimes, for example, if the waiting time for a pair of shoes is a year and a half, like it is currently.
1 year and a half.
A year and a half for a pair. So essentially, the customers just paid, thousands of dollars.
Yeah.
They're not going to see anything material for the next 1.5 years. And all they have to show for it is the promise from this crazy bespoke shoemaker that he will deliver what he promised. And I think that's something which is, in my industry, is super important. So you're only as good as your word. And again, every morning I remind myself of this when I wake up, just to make sure that you're always accountable. And I guess I got a little bit of this from my mum in a way, because and you've met my mum, you know what kind of person she is. So when I first shared with her the whole idea of going into a business, and this was even before going to Italy and becoming a shoemaker, she told me, sure. I mean, she was very supportive. She was like, do whatever you want to do, but just make sure when you do it right, and do right by people. And as long as you always do the right thing, which is easier said than done, eventually karma will come back, whether it's in terms of the business growing or people, people will refer people to you and stuff. So that's a very important, I guess, value in a way that I aspire to, just to make sure that you always keep to your word in whatever context. Right. Whether it's not just to customers, right? Could be to a supplier. Like if you tell them you're going to pay them on time, you pay them on time. If it's a collaboration with a brand, you tell them, I'm going to do this for the collaboration, you do this. You don't flick and change your mind. So I think, I would say perfectionism and the value of my word are the two most important things that really kind of, get me out of bed every day. So
okay. Thank you. I have one last question before we end. And I personally love to hack life and hack everything. Basically, I love to find shortcuts in things where the quality is still the same, but you can do it in like one step instead of 5. For a person who is new to shoes and all that, is there any hack that you have when it comes to just either in shoes in general or bespoke shoes? Leave it to you.
So I think the most common predicament that the typical customer always complains when they come to me is that, I've tried so many different brands of shoes out there, and they all don't fit me. I think I must need bespoke. Then they hear the price of bespoke and they're like, maybe I don't need bespoke anymore.
maybe slippers can already.
Maybe I can find some. So I always tell customers, a lot of times when you go and buy shoes, and this is the same for whether it's female shoes or men's shoes. That means whether you're man or lady, the same principles apply. Understand your own feet first, meaning understand whether or not your feet. And again, it's one of those things where a lot of times there are certain stereotypes or labels that we give ourselves. And one of the most common ones, especially for my female customers, is that I have wide feet. Trust me, most women don't have wide feet, or at least they don't have feet that are as wide as they think they are. It's just that they're always so used to wearing either the wrong size or the wrong fit that they always feel that the shoes don't fit well. And because of that, they always get this idea or this perception that their feet are wide. But
so
actually,
it's uncomfortable equals to wide feet.
But to be honest, I would say 50% of the customers who actually think they have wide feet don't have wide feet. It's just that they've been buying from the wrong brands. So once you understand the unique sort of shape or the properties of your own foot, only once you've done that, then you can go shoe shopping. And I would say 90% of people out there don't need bespoke shoes. And again, this is probably hurting my business more than anything. But if you understand your feet and you go out, to the different brands and you look for a reputable brand that has somebody that, really understands how to do a proper fitting for you. Usually you can define a good shoe brand as a brand that has multiple fits. So they won't just have one single fit and expect everyone to fit into that. Usually, if it's a good shoe brand, you're going to have different lasts. That means, for example, this particular last fits maybe slim feet with a high instep, for example. Other lasts might fit broader feet with a low instep. So understanding your feet first, then going out, finding a reputable footwear brand that has multiple fits, and then obviously speaking to a professional during the whole process. So I think that's what we try to do at my brands as well. When a customer comes in, we're not just selling you a pair of shoes, we're actually teaching you how to define a good fit, how to look for a good fit, what to look for when it comes to a good fit. And even if you don't buy a pair of shoes, you go home with that education, right? And the next time you go shoe shopping, hopefully you'll make a better, purchase decision. But I think the life hack is really, you don't need bespoke. The life hack is really understand your feet first before you go shoe shopping, and don't just kind of, take the retail staff's word for, something wrong with your feet or whatever. No, a lot of times you can find the right fit. If you know how.
So is this for sneakers, or you're talking about
any shoe?
Any shoe.
Any shoe. So whether it's a dress shoe, whether it's a ballet flat, if you're a lady, whether it's sneakers are actually one of the easiest shoes to fit.
So sneakers are a little bit more,
they're more
forgiving,
exactly.
Right? And, you're talking about like more others other than sneakers. Okay.
So the hardest shoes to fit generally would be kind of loafers. For the ladies, your ballet flats, anything that's open without laces but has something covering your heel and your toes. These generally are the hardest shoes to fit. But start off with understanding your feet, and then once you really understand your feet, then you can go out and look for the correct brand of shoes, because you need to know that first before you go shopping. If not, you're going to end up disappointed. You're going to end up buying something, and everyone has the same story, right? I spent so much money on that pair, doesn't fit, gives me blisters, painful, blah blah blah, that kind of stuff. So that would be my life hack, I think.
Thank you. Anything do you want to share when it comes to just passion and for those people who say that I want to try something? Anything that you have words for them?
So I guess you're talking about people who do it as a side gig in a way.
They probably do it as a side gig first.
Job and then,
but they feel that something's empty and they really want to pursue something. What would you say of that?
I think the biggest challenge is obviously balancing, your financial commitments with the passion, right? I think unfortunately, not every passion makes the same amount of financial sense as others might. There are some passions that happen to be more fortunate. They make more money, and other passions it's a lot harder to make money. So I think my advice for anyone who's considering turning a side gig potentially into a full-time thing is to really, obviously the passion is there already, right? Because in the first place, you would only be doing it as a side gig if you're really passionate. Because we all know at the end of a long day, the last thing you want to do is do something else unless you really love that thing. But have a look and see whether or not you can think of a creative way to make money from that passion. And again, think out of the box, right? You don't have to do what everyone else has done. Like just because everyone else has been selling shoes this particular way doesn't mean you have to be selling it that way. You can think of a creative way to do it. Find a niche, and if you can find something like that, then just take the leap and go for it. Because at the end of the day, you already have what a lot of people don't have, which is that passion to drive you. And that's the only thing that will keep you going when shit gets hard.
True.
Because no amount of nagging or scolding or whatever is as good a motivator as having passion or interest in that thing that you do. And especially at the start, be prepared to just, I guess, slog it out, suck it up, and never lose sight of why you started this whole thing in the first place. Like for me, that's why I keep my bespoke shoes line exactly the way it was when I first started, and hopefully it'll never change, because that was why I started the whole journey in the first place. And I will always, I guess, ground myself to that. I root myself in my bespoke shoemaking craft in a way. So
Thank you for sharing that.
No, you're most welcome, Jason.
Thank you so much for this time, Josh. Appreciate it.
No worries. Thanks for having me, Jason.